Hi, Sophia, and welcome to the Natural Birth Podcast. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you, Anna, and thank you for having me on.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you on. Not only are you a fellow midwife, holistic, beautiful, woman-centered, you're also part of my mentorship, the Sacred Birth Worker Mentorship. So I'm getting to know you really deeply inside the container, which I love. And now you're coming to share your amazing birth stories. And not only that, but before we begin, I mean, you have to tell all the birth nerds right now, you've just come back from a birth. You've slept 1.5 hours.
Yeah,
Tell us about give us a little bit of snippet of how you're feeling right now as a birth worker coming back from
I'm
a birth.
I'm just feeling the birth high. I think every birth worker knows that high,
Yes.
and it's just filling me with love and just feeling blessed. I was singing that song to myself. I'm feeling blessed.
Hmm.
Um, Even when I'm looking like a mess, I'm feeling blessed. Even though the life is full of stress, I open up my heart like the greatest treasure chest.
Hmm.
And I was singing that to myself on the way over. It's
Oh, oh, there's nothing better. Like when you jumped on, I was like, "Are you sure you can do this? You've been up all night. You've been at a birth." And you're like, "But I'm on the high." And I was like, "Yeah, right. I remember that." Like, not that was a long time ago, but like, of course, you're on the high. Like, you're gonna crash later, but right now you're flying like a kite, aren't you?
yeah. And I'm a double birth high because I've just been at a birth and now I'm thinking about my births, which were incredible. So
Oh,
double whammy.
oh, I'm so excited to hear about your birth stories and that you're coming on with this beautiful oxytocin high. I always speak about that, how we get high from the oxytocin that is
Yeah,
released in the woman. It's incredible how you just by proxy, how you can just be in the room and get that high. It is amazing. I love it too. Oh, it
connection.
makes me want to go to birth now. Anyways, we're gonna hear about your birth stories, which is almost equally as amazing. So with no further ado, Sophia, take us back to, becoming pregnant the first time. What did you think about birth at that time, and how did you decide on how you were going to birth? And yeah, take us back to that time.
Well, I think probably one of the reasons why I wanted to become a midwife was because I was ready to have children. I always knew I wanted to have children, but obviously the world we live in, the society we live in, is so disconnected from birth, from the body, from many things that nature gives us, um, that I really wanted to know all about it. So I was like, one of the reasons why I became, I think it was probably a subconscious reason, because there are many reasons, but yeah, one of the strong reasons was that I wanted to become a mother myself.
Mm.
Um, and so I'd been studying for 2 years already before I had my own baby. And it had taken us quite a while to get pregnant. Nothing like we weren't nothing particularly wrong. It just seemed to take a long time to get there. And I was thinking about it today that when we started looking into it, I was found to have polycystic ovaries, and I was like, oh God, my body doesn't work properly, and la 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 la. And then I went on a diet of low glucose index and low dairy, and my husband went away for 2 weeks, and the night he came back, we conceived.
Yes. Nutrition is a big part, and like getting inflammation out of your body and like what you eat, like you are what you eat. It's
Yeah.
so true.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it's cliche, but it's so true.
Yeah.
Like gluten and especially gluten, I think, but also dairy and other things can really inhibit you, can't it? Yeah.
Totally. Totally. The more I learn about it, the more I'm like, oh, why don't we just learn this in primary school?
Ah. Like so many things.
Yeah, I think that a lot of things.
Yeah.
um, but it was basically the the perfect pregnancy because yes, I was working quite a lot as a student, and in the second year, it was all looking at sort of high risk and medical conditions and whatever, whatever. So there was quite a lot of that influence, but I had so much trust in myself and in the birth process. And I knew that a lot of the things that I was actually seeing were iatrogenic, they were induced by the system.
Yes.
So I knew I could take myself out of that, and I knew I could make my own decisions about that. And then, because there was no point me starting my third year because I was going to have a baby in November, I stopped doing anything at 26 weeks pregnant, so I could just concentrate on being pregnant,
Oh,
and it was so lovely. It was so lush.
love
I did
that.
yoga every day. I took the dog for a walk every day. Nourished myself. Ah, it was just an incredible time to really be with me and with him,
Mm.
my baby, and it was really, really beautiful. Um, and I wish all mothers could have that.
I was just thinking that, I wish that we had a society that supported women from the day she got pregnant to be able to nourish herself and care for herself.
Yeah,
That first trimester where you're supposed to pretend that you're not
yeah,
pregnant,
yeah.
where
Which is often
you
the hardest
the
because
hardest.
you're tired and sick, and
Yes, and so many women face, the employer that says, well, you're not showing up at work, you're just sick all the time, you know, facing potentially, getting sacked or, all of these things.
yeah,
I wish that our society would support women. And if you listen to this and you have the opportunity financially to take more time off,
yeah.
like preferably all of pregnancy, but obviously that's only if you want to or that serves you and if you can, but like as much as possible. I love that for you that you had that. That's amazing.
It was such a gift in that, and
Mm.
I think looking back, I didn't realize what a gift it was at the time, but it set me up so well for, yes, that birth, but also then for pregnancies and births afterwards.
Mm.
It's great. Really great.
So where did you decide to birth your first baby?
At home.
Ooh, I love that. I love that. Tell us about that decision making.
I don't think there was really much of a decision about it. It was I knew pretty much from the get-go that that's where I'd want to give birth. It did run through my mind, or maybe I should go to the midwifery centre, because in the hospital that I was training at, they had an alongside centre, which just had midwives in it, and it was a lovely environment to be in, and I liked working in there. But it wasn't my home. And then I say a home birth, but actually we gave birth. We were living in a little cabin in somebody's garden. And I was worried, or we were worried, that the floor wouldn't hold the birth pool.
Oh,
So the person that we rented the cabin from said, well, you can use my house.
oh,
So he
bless.
left his house for 3 days.
No.
Yeah, so that I could give birth in his house.
Oh, wow.
So lovely. What an incredible guy.
That is incredible. Did you choose to go with an independent midwife or the NHS?
No, I went with the NHS midwives. Um, I think I didn't even really consider independent midwife. I probably would if I was in England now.
Yeah.
Um, but I went with NHS midwives, and I had quite a few come through the birth because I was in labour for quite a long time.
Right. Oh, well, let's dive into the birth story then. So tell us, did you have any early signs of labor approaching for you at all?
Well, I desperately didn't want to have the fight of not having an induction. I
Mm.
knew I didn't want an induction, and I really didn't want to have the stress of fighting for that. So I did agree to have a sweep, which I know is an induction, but um, I agreed to have a sweep,
At what
and I
time did
lost
you have a sweep? What week? Do you
about
remember?
41 weeks, I think.
Yeah.
About 41 weeks. And I had a bit of a bloody show and mucus, but nothing really started until 2 days later. And it's another thing I was thinking about on the way over. I was thinking, like, people always ask you how long your labor is. How long was your labor? And it's so subjective,
Mm.
because I can honestly say that as the woman doing that labor, it was about 56 hours.
Mm.
For the midwife in me, it was about 32 hours.
Mm.
On record, it's about 4 hours.
Oh.
So, like, when did it start? How did it start?
Mm.
it's how you experience it, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think the woman is the person to ask when did it start because it's like those little niggles, like even feeling nesty, dreamy, having, that prodromal potentially labor. That's labor. It's
Yeah,
just like you and I were scarred, right? But we also know better. But we also have that from our training, right? Like, oh, you only count from this amount of time, or like active labor, like
yeah,
that's okay, now you're in true labor, for example, or
yeah.
um but that's bullshit. That's the patriarchal bullshit
Yeah.
that is trying to measure women's bodies. It's the woman knows. So you would say 56 hours. I believe
Yeah.
you. I think that that's true.
Nobody does maths in labor.
No.
So I woke up on Monday morning and I could just start to feel the small waves, small little surges coming, maybe every half an hour, maybe every 20 minutes. But we'd planned to go for a long walk around a lake. We were living in Norfolk at the time, which has some really beautiful water areas, and um, and then go and do a big shop. We needed to get all the stuff that I wanted to have with me. Um, so I didn't let my partner know that anything was happening because I was like, well, it all just might stop, and I don't want to get overexcited, and it might just stop. So let's just see how this goes. And he could see that I was moving a bit slower than normal, but there wasn't any other real signs that anything was happening until we got halfway around the lake. So it's a 2 kilometer walk, and we got halfway around the lake, and there's a bench. And I said, oh, I've just got to sit down for a minute. I've been having tightenings all morning. I was like, and he was like, you're telling me now when we've got halfway around the lake and we've got another kilometer to walk back again? But don't worry, I'll make it back. I'll make it back. But it was the longest walk we've ever done around that lake. And then we went into the supermarket and we did the shop. And again, it took quite a long time, but he was there and he was supporting. And at some point I said, oh, I've just got to go to the toilet. I think I was about 15 minutes in the toilet. And he was like pacing up and down outside, about to open the door and go, Sophia, we had a baby. But luckily I came out just before he intruded on everybody else in the toilet. And we got everything we needed and we headed back home. And I was starting to go into Labourland. By the time we got home, it was the evening, and I was starting to go into that space where I really needed to just focus in on me. And so he left me in the cabin and went to set up the birth pool and set up the birth space. And it's interesting because I remember feeling quite alone and feeling quite vulnerable and calling for him. But when I look back on it in my memory, it's actually a beautiful time when I was alone and strong and doing it and going there and letting myself go there. So I have these sort of parallel opposite emotions running beside each other at the same time. But eventually he came in and he said it's ready.
Mhm.
He walked through the cold garden. Actually, when he was coming over to come and collect me after he'd finished it, he told me that just above our cabin he saw a shooting star
Oh,
sort of land next to our cabin.
wow.
And got me. And he'd made it magical. Like I'd written out affirmations and I'd drawn pictures of positions that we could use, and we'd set up candles and oil burners and the pool and everything. So he'd made it really, really beautiful. And I basically spent the evening coming in and out of the pool, resting. It stopped for a little while the first time I went in the pool, so it was a good sign that it wasn't imminent, or it was good. I could have a little rest. And I think by about 11 o'clock, I said in the morning, I said, okay, I think it's time to call a midwife. to see where we're at. And I was like, I'm really hoping that I'm 8 centimeters dilated and I'll have a baby really soon, because they'd got really intense. But she came over and she checked, and she was like, oh, you're 4 centimeters, so you're in, active labor,
Mm-hmm.
so I'll stay. But I didn't feel deflated, because I knew that doesn't really mean anything.
Oh, I love that.
You can just go from one to the other in no time. And I knew that me and my baby were doing really, really well. I knew that we were working together. I knew that it was doable. Like there was never a question that it wasn't doable.
Yeah.
And then I called my doula, and she came over, and she gave me some rebozo, and she tried to do some Reiki on my back, but I just couldn't stand anybody touching me at that point. So I threw her hand off, and I threw anybody's hand that tried to touch me. And I was like, I'm sure I'm going to want loads of massage when I'm in labor, because I love massage and I love people. Very touchy-feely person, and I really wanted to. I thought I would really want to be touched and massaged, but I had no interest in it whatsoever.
Yeah. Did you have a lot of back labor? Is that why she was going to give you massage or Reiki?
No, I think it was just no, I didn't have back labor at all. It was just a good access point, because I was most of the time leaning forwards or on my knees or on all fours. So it was a good access point. And
right.
Obviously the sacrum is a sacred place, so she wanted to focus her energy there. And it was the whole of Tuesday, was in and out of the pool and eating and resting. And I remember everything tasting like I was really trying to eat and really trying to keep myself fed, but everything just tasted like sand in my mouth. Anything that I put in my mouth just tasted like sand, and I was sort of forcing myself to eat it. But I had amazing support. My husband was incredible, as well as supporting me. He was also like hosting the midwives. He cooked for everybody, cooked lunch for everybody and dinner for everybody, and was handing out nuts and snacks.
Wow.
Sounds like it was like a cinema or something, but it didn't feel like that. It felt very intimate and friendly, and I felt very held, but also private. Like people were there around me, but I was in my own space.
Beautiful.
And the main thing that helped me was just making a lot of noise. The water and noise just got me through every surge. And in the evening time, they'd gone through different shifts of midwives that were coming and going. And about roughly 12 hours after the first examination, the sort of evening midwives were there for the night shift. And I hadn't had any examination since then. And one of them said, is it okay if we do another one? Because it's been quite a long time. We kind of just want to see what's going on. I was like, yeah, fine, that's cool. And the first one had been done when I was on all fours. So the second one they did when I was lying down. And they're like, oh, you're 4 centimeters.
Oh no.
But your cervix is really effaced, and there's a really strong bag of waters there. But again, because I knew that, again, it doesn't mean anything.
Oh, I love that that's your reaction. I was so worried you were going to be super deflated. I love that. I love that.
Yeah, and she explained it really well as well. Like she wasn't like, one of those midwives that go, oh, you're still 4 centimeters, or you're just 4 centimeters. She was like, no, you're fully effaced and it's really, really thin. If that bag of waters breaks, then I think you'll have a baby.
Yes, that's it. And this is such a good piece of information, isn't it? Because the bag of waters can do that, can't it? If the head is not applied directly on the cervix, sometimes you can go longer with that bag of waters, keeping quotation marks just at 4 centimeters, even though you're probably ready and just could just open. Yes, exactly. I remember, once with a woman that I was caring for doing a vaginal examination after days of her being in labor. and she was like barely 2, but I could just open her to 5 like paper, and it was
Yeah.
just because of that the head wasn't well applied.
Yeah.
That's really good information you just shared
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
What happened then?
Well, and then I was like, well, I've just got to get back in the pool. So I got back in the pool, and every single time I had a surge, I would just focus and I'd tell myself, waters break, waters break, waters break, waters break. It became a mantra for me every time I had a surge. I don't know whether I was saying it out loud or whether I was saying it in my head, but it was just waters break, waters break, waters break, waters break. And after 2 hours, they broke. And I had these few weird contractions where like I'd been so in it and so focused. And then after the waters broke, I was like, there was these 2 or 3 contractions where I was just like, oh, I don't know what to do with myself now. What's going on? And looking back, I'm just coming to realize that probably that was his reaction to like, oh my God, what am I going to do now? My head doesn't have a cushion. My head doesn't have a water balloon around it. What am I going to do now? And he was like, oh, okay, I've got to apply myself. And then he applied himself, and the urge to push just absolutely took me over.
Wow.
It was just a full body experience. My whole body was just whoa, opening and pushing. And it was a long quote unquote pushing stage. It took about 2.5 hours, I think, for him to be born.
Normal.
Normal.
Totally normal.
But the whole time it really felt like we were working together. Like, yes, it was huge and it was strong, and I was using everything I had, or it was using everything I had. It wasn't even me that was really doing it. um, and there came a point where his head was coming down, and I put my hand on his head. And my husband's Greek, and I'd been speaking Greek to him because we speak Greek between ourselves. And I told him kefali, which is head in Greek. And then I felt an arm flop out. And I said, Kieri, the hand. I was just sort of narrating what was happening. But of course, the midwives couldn't understand what I was saying. So they looked behind me, and through the sort of water, they thought they saw a foot. Oh. So they sort of said, oh, Sophia, turn around, quick. So I turned around, and in the next contraction, he was born. And I brought him up out of the waters onto my chest. And it was incredible because he came out with all his eyes scrunched up and his face scrunched up, and it was kind of like, like they do, a bit like this. And suddenly, after about 2 minutes, he just opened his eyes and went, wow. And both me and Costis, who was leaning over me, sort of hugging both of us, just went, whoa. It was like his spirit had entered his body and just like gone, here I am. And that's how he lives his life from now on. He enters the room, he goes, here I am. Yeah, it was incredible. Incredible. And the memories of it get better the more I look back on it.
Did you stay long in the pool, and did you birth your placenta there as well?
My aim was to birth my placenta in the pool. And I'd recently read Becky Reed's Birth in Focus. I don't know if you know the book. And she was explaining how amazingly women can birth their own placentas, believe it or not. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I can do that. So I was like, oh, I can guide my own placenta out instead of having an injection or somebody guiding it out for me. I can do it myself. I know if I'm going to pull too hard.
Yeah.
But it didn't feel quite right to do it in the pool. It just felt a bit, I don't know if it felt messy or just not quite grounded enough. There wasn't enough gravity. So I stepped out of the pool and had a bowl underneath me. And I think my husband describes this incredible image where I was holding the baby
Mhm.
and squatting over the bowl and was just, I wasn't reaching inside myself, but I was just guiding my own placenta out to drop into the bowl. It's like,
Goosebumps.
yeah, you were just so strong in that moment. He was like astounded by it.
Yeah.
And I think the other midwives, and I was really happy that it was those two midwives who were there, because I'd actually worked with both of them as a student on different shifts, and I really respected both of them in the way that they worked, which was great, because
Mm.
within the NHS you don't necessarily know who you're going to get. But they both said, oh wow, you really taught me something about the third stage
Mm.
at your birth. Like, oh, good to know that you can always learn.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. I can really see you doing that. And that is just the ultimate image of womanly power. I love
Yeah.
that. Wow. That was your first
That
birth?
was my first.
And how long after that did you become pregnant again and birth
Hmm.
your second?
I had a miscarriage in between.
Mm.
I was expecting to sort of do, oh yeah, I'll do the 2 year gap, because that's what you do.
Mm.
Um, but no, it ended up being almost 4 years between one birth and the
Mm.
next, which was, I think, what was needed in the end for both of them. So I give birth every 4 years. Every time there's a World Cup, I say I have a baby. Again, the second time round, it took us a long time to get pregnant. I had obviously the miscarriage, but it seemed to take us again about 2 years to get pregnant. But we were very happy to be pregnant, and I always knew I wanted at least 2 children.
Mm.
But I think I probably took it a bit for granted the second time round. I was like, oh yeah, the first time went just fine. I don't really need to do much for this one. Like the first one, even though I'd done birth preparation, I'd taught birth preparation classes myself, and I'd had so much exposure to birth as a student midwife. I still did a hypnobirthing course, and I did yoga and meditation. But this time around, obviously, I had a 3-year-old, so it was a lot harder to find the time. And I was working as a midwife doing shift work.
That's taxing.
Yeah, and my husband would go away for 2 months at a time to work. So it was quite a lot to juggle and balance, and then take time to focus in
Mm.
on the pregnancy, on the baby, and what to expect. And I think I was just banking on the fact that it had all gone so amazingly the first time round that I didn't really need to do anything this time round. And in the end, it helped, obviously, to have that trust and to have had that physiological birth. But I think it was to my detriment that I didn't go deeper in the
Mm.
second pregnancy.
I love that you share that, especially like with all the knowledge you have as a midwife, for everyone to hear that even when you're having second baby, fifth baby, that you do take the time to really,
Yeah.
because every pregnancy and birth is going to be unique. That baby's unique. You're going to be different from how you were last time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that you share that.
It was, yeah, definitely. And even looking at him now and how he's grown up, like, I feel like if I'd have given him a bit more grounding when he was in utero and a bit more attention when he was in utero, it might not be showing up so much now. Like, I think it all follows through. It's all part of the same continuum and spiral.
The birth imprint, yeah.
Having said, it was sort of it was fine to be pregnant. I like being pregnant. I feel like a goddess walking down the street when I'm pregnant, and I love it when the bump shows and you can really, the only time in my life where I wear really tight clothes because I can show off my bump. So I did enjoy it. I just didn't go as deep as what I think was probably asked of me.
Yeah.
And again, I went overdue. and this time my waters broke first.
Oh wow. And
So,
what time was that? 40 weeks, 41 weeks, 42 weeks?
almost 41 weeks. So my first was born at 40 weeks and 9 days, so a week and a half. And my second was born at 40 weeks and 6 days.
Perfect.
And we'd sort of planned an afternoon with some friends just to go around and chill out of theirs, and they had kids. But I was going to lie down and take a little nap, and my husband was going to take our eldest to our friends. And I'd been lying down for about 20 minutes when I sort of felt a pop. Like, oh, what was that? It felt very different from when it had happened before. And I got up and I sort of started to move, and it was going glug, 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 glug. It does. And I went to the toilet, and it was a little bit green. I was like, oh. And I know that is called non-significant meconium because it's non-significant, because it doesn't mean anything. And I also know, probably like I had too much awareness and knowledge at that point. I also know that if you've got meconium, then they ask you to be in the labor ward, and they may or they may not ask you to do continuous monitoring, or they might suggest observations for the baby once it's born, and blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
I knew he was fine, but I also didn't want to invite into my home midwives who were going to be like, oh, you should go up and do this and do that and do the other.
Yeah.
Or have any fear themselves. So I made the choice to stay at home and see if in the next 2 hours my surges don't start. I also knew that, like, I knew too much. I knew that there'd be a change in shift. I knew that there was, do you know what I mean? Like, it was just a bit, too much information, too much headspace. So I said, okay, if they don't start in the next 2 hours, I'll go up and I'll have a CTG and I'll prove everything's absolutely fine, and then I'll come back home. That's what I'll do. So basically that's what I did. I waited 2 hours. They hadn't really started, and I was like, okay, I'll go up and I'll have the monitoring, and then everything will be fine, and I'll come back home and we'll have a baby at home. But of course, I got up there and it just took them bloody forever to do anything. So I put on the CTG monitor myself. I was like taking my own blood pressure and just be like, can we get out now? And one of the midwives who was at my first birth was on shift, and she would be the one to come out. She was the community, so she was going to come out to home birth. So I was like, oh great, we can get that, and fab. And I had a student midwife following me, and she happened to be on the labor ward when I went in for the monitoring. We're like, oh, we're pretty much starting, we're going to go home in a minute. But it took them forever to do the monitoring, to get a doctor in to say, do you want to, we have to let you know that you're going against medical advice, blah blah. I was like, yeah, give me the paper, I'm going home. But of course, by the time all of that had happened, I was in labor. I was in labor and I was having really strong contractions. And because I make so much noise when I'm in labor, it sounds like I'm literally about to have a baby.
Mm.
And so after they sort of eventually, I got through all of that red tape, I was coming out the door in the corridor of the labor ward. And I was in the middle of the corridor having a contraction going, I'm going home. With all of my colleagues looking at me like, are you sure you're going home? I got another sort of few steps down the corridor and I was like, I'm going home. I got to the front door of the labor and I was like, I'm going home. I had 3 contractions in the space of about 15 meters. And my husband says that everybody, like the whole labor ward, the women, whoever was there and all the colleagues were sort of looking at me like, she's gonna have a baby on the stairs. No. But I was determined to get home, mostly because we'd prepped my eldest son so well and he was so excited to be part of it. And I really felt like I owed it to him to be there. Like I really wanted him to be there. I really felt that he needed to be there to witness the birth of his sibling. But a midwife ran over from the midwife unit and said, Sophia, I have a pool ready for you waiting in the birth center. I was like, okay. So I went to the birth center and they did have a beautiful pool ready, and she was a really supportive midwife, and it was a good birth experience, but it was a much more angry birth experience.
Mm.
He was also back to back. So I didn't get lots and lots of back pain or any of those physical pains, but looking back on it, I would have one really big contraction, one little contraction, one smaller contraction, and then a long wait, and then one really big one, one medium one, one little one, and then a long wait. So looking back on it, it was quite obvious. I wasn't thinking that at the time.
Yeah, and you also get that urge to push potentially a bit sooner. Did you get that? Was that what's happening when you were walking towards the door?
I think it probably sounded like it, but that all empowering body urge to push never seemed to come. Actually, it was more that it was just really, really intense, and I felt like I was doing it on my own. Like my body was doing it on my own, as opposed to his body helping himself.
Yes.
So yes, I think I was pushing, but it wasn't the same sort of pushing as what I was experiencing the first. So it just felt worlds apart. And I didn't know he was, because he came out back to back as well. And
Sunny side up.
Yeah, sunny side up. And I didn't know until my husband, who was supporting me in the pool from behind, said, oh, I can see his eyebrows. And I thought, you're not supposed to fucking see his eyebrows. But it explained a lot when he came out looking at me.
How long did you push for? How long were you there in the pool? Was it pretty quick, or were you there for a while?
I was actually there for about 2.5 hours, I think, in the pool. Again, so it had probably taken about 2 hours with all the faffing, by which time I'd established.
Yeah.
The whole birth was about 4 hours.
Yeah, right. Mm.
And I
And what
don't
was
know.
the sensation for you to push out a posterior baby compared to the first? Was that different too? The crowning, the birthing?
So it, like I said, it just felt that my body was having to do a lot more.
Yeah.
My body was having to do it without the support of whatever he could give.
Yeah.
Um, which didn't feel bad. It wasn't. I didn't feel it was impossible. There wasn't sort of. Yeah, it was. It, it didn't feel impossible. It just felt that I really, really intense, and there was definitely a lot of anger. Like I was like, why isn't he coming? Why isn't he here yet? I'm a second time mum. This should just happen.
Mm.
And I felt quite a lot of guilt about that anger afterwards.
Mm.
And it wasn't until somebody said, like, maybe that's what you needed to feel in order to birth him.
Exactly my thoughts. Exactly. You needed that fire from
Mm,
anger, from rage, from frustration
yeah,
to have the power to push out that posterior baby that wasn't helping himself to be birthed as a baby lying in the optimal position potentially would.
yeah. And I look back on it, and there are choices that I definitely would make differently now, but I don't regret any of the choices that I made then, thinking back on who I was and how I was
Yeah.
and what I knew then.
We birth the way we live, don't we?
Exactly.
Mm.
We do. We birth the way we live.
And I think also, I really love that you mentioned this, that you had anger and that was, you used that. And it's us that classify that as something negative.
Yeah.
It's power,
Mm,
right? It's
mm,
power. It's how we
mm,
use it that matters.
mm.
Are we destructive or are we powerful? Do we, turn it into, in a sense, sacred rage or destructive rage, right? And it sounds like you just tapped into that primal Kali energy that also is a part of being woman, right?
Yeah,
I love that.
totally. Yeah.
So he was birthed in the pool. What
He was
happened? Did you
birthed in
pick
the
him up?
pool. I did. I brought him up to my chest as well. He had like one side of his face was really flat and bruised.
Oh,
I think the first thing I ever said to him was, "Hey, squish face."
oh,
Um, but it soon recovered. Like within 24 hours, it was gone and it was fine.
that's amazing.
And they wanted me to stay for whatever, and I was like, "No, I'm going to go home and I'm going to show his big brother." We'd planned for my elder son, his older brother, to cut the cord.
Oh,
So I don't know why I didn't just leave the whole thing attached at the time, but I didn't. I just left a really long cord so that when we got home at about 6:30 in the morning, we could tie it a bit closer, and his older brother could cut the rest of it off, which was really, really sweet,
it's super special.
super special. And we arrived, and he'd already woken up. He was really excited.
Mm.
We cuddled on the sofa, and he just looked up at us and goes, "Am I a big brother now?" "Yes, you are, darling." And he went to nursery that day and walked in like, "I'm a big brother."
Oh, bless.
So it was really special that he might not have witnessed the birth, but he got to see him really early and got to be part of it with the cord cutting.
Mm.
Yeah. And yeah, I think all continuing on from maybe not really going deep into that pregnancy, I think also I wanted to sort of show off, like after you've had a physiological birth, you're fine, you can do anything. And I don't think the month or two afterwards as well, I didn't take care of myself as I should have done. And
it demands much more, doesn't it, when you have a little toddler as well? Like the first time around, potentially you can do that better than when you have a little one as well.
totally. But I think also you can ask for it. You're totally within your rights to say, I need to be
100%.
careful.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether the birth has been fantastic or whether it's
Yeah.
been really traumatic or difficult on your body, a challenge on your body. You need to take that time to repair and recover.
Absolutely.
So important.
So important.
And I think because I was pushing myself, I didn't take that time. And then later on, I had postnatal depression. I definitely had much lower mood in the year after he was born than I had with my first.
Beautiful that you share that.
Yeah.
Because it goes hand in hand, doesn't it? Like the preparation for the birth, but also how you are supported by yourself, but also by your surroundings postpartum. It's so common, isn't it? Postpartum depression, most likely from depletion and being unsupported most of the times. Hey. Yeah.
And just feeling like, okay, 3 months have passed, I can't ask for stuff now. Well, you still can, because you're still in that postpartum space, you're still recovering. It takes probably 3 years to find yourself back to who you are now. It's not back to who you were then, it's who you are now.
Yeah.
It's, you can't go backwards. Spiraling into who you are after you've given birth takes a long time, and it takes support. And the first person that needs to recognize it is the mother, unfortunately, in many ways, because it's so hard for us to ask for that support and help.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So 4 years after that?
4 years after that, we had absolutely no problems getting pregnant. It was an absolute fluke.
So it wasn't intentional, it was a whoopsie.
It was, whether it was intentional or not, is subconsciously intentional, probably.
Yeah.
I have the very strong feeling that her spirit was actually the miscarriage that I had between the two boys. And my second boy asked her to be her older brother. He wanted to be her older brother.
Oh.
He is a beautiful older brother. He loves her to absolute pieces and really takes care of her. So that's how it's come to me.
Beautiful.
But for this pregnancy, we'd moved back to Greece, where my husband's from, back to Corfu. So I didn't have the option. Well, I didn't have the support of the NHS how I know it and how I knew it. And there was a part of me that was like, really resisted the idea of having a quote unquote free birth, unassisted birth. I was like, well, I'm a midwife. Why? I'm a midwife. I should have a midwife at my birth. But also, it was a full body no to the public hospital and the private clinic that they have on the island. I did not want to go to those institutions at all. And then asking a private midwife to come and live with me for a month, or to try and make it over from Athens or Thessaloniki, which is at best a 6-hour drive, it just seemed a bit unreasonable for a third time mum. So it was quite a long journey for me coming around to the idea that, do you know what? The best thing I can do is to support myself to have an unassisted birth and to make that my embodied decision without feeling like I'm being forced into it because of circumstance.
Yes, yes.
So this time around, I did take the time to do a lot of inner work and a lot of personal preparation and really connecting with her and her spirit and my own spirit and fears and wishes and ideas and, you know, all of the things that come up when you're open as you are in pregnancy to the other, open to the other, whatever that other is called, whatever you want to call it, whether it's source or God or the veil is lifted in pregnancy. And I embraced that and relished in that during my last pregnancy. And like, you know, my biggest fear was that something awful would happen to my baby. And then not only would that be awful and a tragedy for me and my family, but my career would be up shit creek because who's going to trust a midwife whose own baby didn't make it because she made the choice to birth unassisted? So that was, I had to really come to terms with that and sit with that. And I can't say I was ever comfortable with it. Like, it was never like, oh yeah, that's gonna be fine. that's cool. It was more like, okay, that is a possibility. It's a very, very, very small possibility, but it is a possibility.
Yes. Which it is always, whether you have a midwife there or you're in the hospital, like, as well. But I guess it is such an ultimate thing, isn't it? Of like taking on that responsibility. And for the outside world, in case something does go wrong, you are to blame. And it's not seen with those eyes that, you know what, this could have happened whether I had midwives or at the hospital, because birth in itself is not benign. Like, some babies and some mothers will pass in this portal. Like, that is something that we can't ever, even if the hospitals try to say that they can, like, we will never be able to say that. But the world around us wouldn't look at us or you or the woman who decides to birth unassisted mildly. It would be a full-on witch hunt. For sure. Yes, for sure. For taking that decision. Wow. So I feel you. I feel you for that.
Amazingly though, like amazingly how the stars align, I was contacted by a student midwife from America while I was pregnant, and she was studying midwifery in America, and she was looking for a preceptor. And I said, we talked and we chatted and we really got on. And I said, well, I'd love to have you here and show you how I work, but I have a very, very small practice, very small. If you're happy with that, then I'd love to have you here. I am also going to give birth when you're planning to come, or like right at the beginning of when you're planning to come. So if you make it for that, then you're welcome to join to support me for my birth. So that was kind of on the cards, like she was going to come right towards the end of my pregnancy. So if she made it, fab. If she didn't, we'd be doing it anyway. And so the day before I gave birth was the day that she was arriving.
Wow.
Obviously, I didn't know I was going to give birth then, but so I stayed. That day I made 2 giant lasagnas, one from us and one for her for when she arrived. So she'd have something to eat. She was coming late. And I think making those lasagnas is probably what sent me into labor that night. Because after we picked her up in the airport and settled her in where she was going to stay with her husband and given her her lasagna, I went home, and that night, like I've come to realize that there are no stages of labor. It's again trying to do maths in labor, which is just nonsense. But I definitely had 3 distinct levels to my labor, and there was the breathing level, the moaning level, and the roaring level. So the whole night I didn't even realize what was happening. My husband said he kind of had an idea, because I just started to breathe more heavily every so often. So obviously I was kind of semi-waking up, having a surge, breathing through it, and then falling back to sleep immediately. So I almost wasn't even waking up for them. And we got up in the morning and sort of did the morning routine and got the kids ready to go to school and nursery. And they've become a little bit more intense. And we also wanted to have the kids there, and we prepared them for that birth as well. And my husband was like, should we stay? Do you want us to stay? I was like, no, it might all stop. You never know. Clearly in my mother brain and not my midwife brain.
Yeah.
And I'd also booked a chiropractor appointment for that day. And so I was left alone, and again, it was a period that I really enjoyed being alone. I went and lied down, I put on my birth playlist, and just really surrendered to whatever it was that was going to happen.
How many weeks were you now?
I was at 39 weeks and 4 days, so I hadn't quite reached my due date, quote unquote. And again, I had this, she did this funny little movement. It was really quite uncomfortable. And then about 10 minutes later, I moved and I was like, glug, glug, glug. So I knew my waters had gone. It didn't feel the same pop or the same something extreme again. I knew my waters had gone, and I went to the toilet and it was green again. So I was like, I just asked, do I need any outside assistance? And the resounding answer was no, you're fine.
I love that.
Fine. And the next few surges became much more intense. So I called my husband and I said, you've got to come back, go and pick up the kids, bring them back. A friend of mine was going to come so that she could be there for the kids and he could be there for me. And I contacted the student midwife. Say, I think the time's coming. Come over. And I remember I was really comfortable on the bed. The surges were starting to become intense, and I realized I needed my support team there, because I couldn't go through them without moaning, without making noise. And I really needed to go to the toilet. I was like, I'm just going to wait till they get here so that they can support me to get there. And then when my friend came in, I just was leaned against her back and went into the bathroom and went to the toilet. And it was such a relief to go there and just empty myself. and my husband arrived. I was like, it's funny how you can be so much more abrupt with the people who are close to you. And I was like, pull now, go do it. So he started to fill that up, and as that was getting done, he came up, and it was actually really interesting to feel myself, because most of the times before I spent so much time in the water, which really helped, but I'd only really felt the surges and the movement that my body could do in the water, whereas this time we had to wait for it to half fill up, and then it was half fill up and we were waiting for the tank to fill with hot water again, you know, classic house issues. And so I really took advantage of being on the toilet and being in like the corner where I could just really press my hands against it and press my feet into the floor. And I straddled the toilet, so it was like I was this rock in the middle of my bathroom, and moved however it was that it took me. I really used the wall to just press against it and rock and feel the strength of myself against the strength of the wall. And my husband was with me, and the student midwife arrived. And I think my husband took a really deep breath at that point when she arrived. And at some point I said, I just got to get in the water. Water, water, water. I don't think I even made a full sentence. I was just like, pool, water, go. But it was downstairs. So I made it downstairs by myself, but with one behind me and one in front of me. And I had a surge in the middle of the stairs. And I didn't realize how close she was at that point. But while we were in the bathroom, they could see the top of her head. But again, because she was also back to back, I didn't feel that big change from surges to open up to surges to getting down. So they were convinced that she was just going to be born on the stairs. But I made it all the way down. Had another contraction before I got in the pool, and then literally just pushed my husband almost into the pool. I just pushed him towards it so that the momentum would carry us towards the pool. And it was only about this deep when I got into it. And the whole pregnancy, he'd been wanting to catch the baby. He was like, oh, I would love to be able to catch the baby. I was like, yeah, but I've been in a labor the whole time. I want to catch the baby. But you've done it with the other two. Do you think I could do it? I was like, well, we'll see how it goes. I'll probably want to do it. But because the water wasn't deep enough for me to be in a kneeling position like I'd always been before, for me to really feel the benefit of it. I mean, I felt the benefit of it as soon as I got into it. It was just this. As soon as I stepped in, I suddenly felt connected to every single water system on the planet. And I could just share whatever I was feeling and whatever I was going through with all of the water of the world. And let me backtrack just one bit, because when we were upstairs, you know, that quote came to me, a woman goes to the stars to collect the soul of her baby. And I've always loved that quote. It's just beautiful. And when I was upstairs, that quote came to me, and in my head, I was like, is this how you fucking get to the stars? And the resounding answer, like I was in connection with source the whole time, because I was asking the whole time for answers. And the resounding answer that came back when I asked that question was like, "You think it's fucking easy to get to the stars?" I was like, "Oh yeah, it's not easy. They have to build a whole rocket and everything." That was my thought process. And each time I'd had to ask Source, it was like going through a portal, like it was going through jumping off another cliff. Like I'd got to a point where I couldn't stay where I was. I had to move forward. But moving forward meant that I was going somewhere I didn't know. And I said to Source, "Do I need any outside support?" "No, you don't," was always the answer. And I said, "Okay, let's go." And I went through the next portal. And the final portal was going to the stars, building a rocket. So I jumped through that and I made it downstairs and I got into the waters. And within about 2 minutes, her head was born. And I was lying back in the water because it was so shallow. And I just relished that moment of her head being there. And one, because it was just this amazing sensation of her being in and out. That last moment of being pregnant. I was stroking her head and telling her I loved her. And also, I was like, "Oh, well, she's back to back, so it's really unlikely to have a shoulder dystocia."
The midwifery brain